In this video, we're going to talk about using a tool called SOAP UI. And what SOAP UI is good for is running web services that you would probably use if you were going to make an orchestration in Composer or something like that. And so for this video, we're gonna use the two SBM Web Services and show you some of the tricks and techniques that we've picked up here to help you out later. So the first thing you want to do is install SOAP UI. So this is a free tool, and if you go to this URL here, soapui.org, you can download it for free. There's certain ones that you can pay for. The pro versions you have to pay for, but any in this SOAP UI area here, these are all free. So once you get it installed and open it up, it's going to look like this. And right now there's nothing in it. So what we need to do is add our project, and we'll talk about that in 1 second. First, let's look at the two web service description files, or WSDLs, that are exposed from SBM. We're going to use those when we set up SOAP UI. So if you look at this URL, my computer's name is right here, obviously, and you should be able to go to this URL. This one's called App Services 72, and there's another one called SBM Admin Services WSDL. The admin services you might not use as often, and we can talk about that later, but for this example we're going to use the app services URL. So what you'd want to do is copy this URL and go back over to SOAP UI and right click on projects and create a new project and give it a name. We'll just call it SBM App Services. You can actually put both of them in one project, but we'll just put this one in. Paste your URL there, and it's handy if you have this checked, and it'll be checked by default, but it'll create sample requests for all the different web service methods. So click OK. It pulls in the definition, and notice what it does here is it creates stub requests for all the different methods in the web service WSDL. Okay, so the first thing you probably want to do is when this WSDL gets pulled in, let's pick on this one right here, that's a real simple one. You'll notice the get version, and if you double click the request, you'll notice that what happens is the endpoint here in the URL gets created with localhost in the name. So unless you're running on the SBM server itself, you'll have to change this endpoint. So what we'll do is edit this endpoint and change the computer name. If you weren't on the SBM server and just ran that, you would obviously get a 404 error because localhost is not on your computer. So in this case, we're going to put in my computer name and just change it. And so then all of the other requests will use this endpoint. You don't have to change it, you just have to change it once. Okay, so with that said, first thing is to do is just test it real quick, and the easiest method to test with is this one called get version. It takes no parameters, and all you have to do is just run it. So we run it, and when it works, you get the version of SBM comes back in the response. If that didn't work, that would be first step in troubleshooting. You might get a 404, like this is the wrong URL, or if you had SSL enabled only, you'd have to change this to SSL and the port. So anyway, it's a good test just to see what's going to happen with the rest of your web services. Okay, so that's a real basic one, and let's pick another one that might be a little more complicated. So we use one here called GetItem. So if you double click GetItem, let's close this other one, we're done with it, and we'll make this one bigger. Alright, so the one thing you have to pay attention to first and this is a trick that you have to do, is notice how all of the input parameters get input with a question mark by default. Okay, so if I just run this web service, I'll get an error, and it looks like this. It says something about some junk. Doesn't really make sense. So what you have to do, and there's no way to change this in SOAP UI as of this build, but what you want to do is copy this section here with the greater than, question mark, less than. We can just copy it, and if you hit Control F, what we're going to do is we're going to find greater than, question mark, less than, and we're going to replace it with greater than, whoops, keep doing that, like this. So basically we're going to replace it and take all the question marks out. Alright, so then click the button that says replace all, and you'll notice that now all of our question marks are gone. Okay, so now if you just ran this web service, you get a slightly different error, and the error you get back is invalid user ID. Okay, so all of the web services except for get version require a user ID and password. So in this case, my user ID is admin and I have no password. So if I just run this one, I'm going to get a message back. Since this is trying to do a get item, it's going to fail and say that it's an invalid ID for this table, which makes sense because I haven't told it which item to go get. Okay, so to take this a little further, let's log into the actual UI. So here we are logged in. I'm not sure if this session's still around. We'll log in again. So if I log in again as our admin user, and we're going to take a look at this item right here, for instance. If we hover over this item, you can see at the bottom it says record ID 77 and table ID 1000. You notice it at the bottom there, but if you don't see that, you can actually open the item, and if you click the button to say copy URL to clipboard, it'll give you the exact same thing. What we're trying to find here is the record ID is 77 and the table that this item belongs to is 1000. So keeping that in mind, we're going to go back over to SOAP UI, and if you scroll down through here, the item ID right here, if we can populate it with, this one wants table ID and item ID. So for most of the web services you can do something like this to show it which item you want to go grab. Okay, so for this one we're just going to run it with that, and so all this is doing is getting that item. Okay, so now we've got the response back from that one particular item. So, and if you scroll down, it's just all the information that you would see in the UI. So where this is helpful is if you need to run web services in an orchestration, sometimes it's easier to manipulate the data or test things or see what the values are going to come back as, or some of these are, if you wanted to do an update on an item, you would actually run this transition item web service, and so in your orchestration it might be easier to first come into SOAP UI, play with it, get all the settings exactly right, and then when you do the orchestration you can fill in the appropriate details there, instead of having to test one thing, deploy, test another thing, deploy, and run through your orchestrations. You can see how these web services work. So for instance, in this get item, what we did is we just pulled all the information, and you'll notice this area down here called extended field. Extended field shows us items or fields that you've defined yourself. So instead of like title and description, which are system fields, they're in all items. This is a field I created in my project called my num. It's just a number field. And so where this becomes helpful is if you want to find the database name, for instance, and you need to use that in your orchestration when you're mapping all your fields. It's just a way to visually see what exactly this web service is going to return. So that's kind of it for SOAP UI. It's a good tool to test things out without having to go through orchestrations. Keep in mind that you can add other WSDLs to the same project. So for instance, here's our admin one. We can just add it as well and just say add WSDL, paste that in there, and so now we'll have both our admin and our app services. So the admin one has some different methods available. You could also add, this isn't just SBM. You can add WSDLs to other web services that you might use, for Salesforce.com or just any web service that has a WSDL. So the thing you just need is the URL for the web service definition, which is the WSDL. That will then create the methods. And the key is you take the question marks out and make sure that you change the endpoint to point to your SBM server if you're not on the SBM server. So hopefully this helps you later troubleshooting and building orchestrations.